Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 29 of the Hammer Territory podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on the evening of June 16th. It is Father's Day, and I am joined, as I almost always am, by Scott Coleman. Scott, how you feeling here in mid-June?
Hey, Brad. Happy Father's Day to all of our dad listeners out there. And I got to be honest, Brad, for the first time in a while, it feels like you and I are doing one of these Sunday evening shows, and there's some like legitimate good things going on with the Braves. It certainly has not always felt this way. Of course, coming off of a pretty terrible road trip, but it looks like finally the Braves have woken up a little bit offensively, and that is very much a sight for sore eyes because, as we know, it has not been the prettiest picture over the last month and a half.
That's right. And of course, the Sunday curse for those people who've been listening to us for a long time, know that even when the Braves seemingly are playing well, they tend to lose on Sundays before me and Scott in particular have to record podcasts. That actually happened today, but I totally agree with you. There is more of an upbeat tenor to this podcast. We should also say at the top of the show that we are part of the Foul Territory network of podcasts. Please subscribe to this show. It would be a huge favor to us. Rate and review as well. Apple, Spotify, Overcast, etc. We will focus some later on in the podcast about Michael Harris and the injury there, unfortunately, and the fallout of that. Also, we'll touch on Grant Holmes' debut, the movement that is Grant Holmes. Also some struggles from Hurston Waldrep, etc. But we should at least begin where you just started, and that is with a pretty encouraging weekend plus. So basically, the Braves just went 3-1 since the last time that either you or I were on the show. And that's a positive thing. They won the series this weekend against Tampa, even with a loss today. And you teased it, but I think the biggest story by far, even with the Harris injury, which we've already talked about a little bit on this podcast feed with Steven and Sean, that the offense actually scored some runs. 28 runs in the last four games, including, and I think crucially, at least 6 runs in all 4 of those games. You don't want to sort of celebrate too early about this team being quote unquote back, especially given the injuries and the losses that they have. But at the very least, the bats have started to heat up a little bit.
Yeah, it really is encouraging to see. And especially some of the players that the Braves really need to step up have seemingly started to step up. Austin Riley had his best weekend by far all season long. He had a tremendous at bat, one of the best at bats on Sunday afternoon of probably his whole career, to tie the game with a 2-run homer to dead center. There's encouraging signs there. Jarred Kelenic is kind of quietly really putting together a nice season. Seems like he's figuring some things out. Sean Murphy drove the ball pretty well at times over the last couple of days, even if the results aren't great. And maybe the stat of the podcast, and this blew my mind when I was researching it, and double check this because math was never my strong suit. But stat of the podcast tonight, the Braves scored 22 runs in the 3 games this weekend. 22 runs. That's the most runs the Braves have scored in 3 consecutive games this season since opening weekend, where they scored 25. So we're talking quite literally since that first series of the year, the Braves have not put up 22 runs in 3 consecutive games until they did this weekend against Tampa. So finally, some signs of life. Of course, we're only talking about 4 games where the offense has woken. We need to see them continue to do it. And God, let's hope if this offense can get going, especially the way the pitching has been for the most part, it feels like the Braves are on the cusp of really breaking out here. And let's hope this weekend was really just a big first step in the right direction.
That would, of course, be nice. And there is reason for belief. You know, we talked to you and I on our last podcast together a week ago, kind of wondering aloud if we should be worried at this point in time. And, at least, not necessarily going to the yellow light on that. But, it's one of those things where I kind of always felt, and I think you did too to some degree, like the math was just on the side of the Braves being at least a little bit better than they had been. I think no one, even the harshest, most angry Braves skeptic right now or 4 days ago, probably would have been in a moment of sobriety willing to acknowledge they were probably not going to have the worst offense in the league over the rest of the season had they been, which is where they were the previous month or so. But, and again, we're not trying to declare victory here after 4 games, but the offense looks like the offense is supposed to look. And that, of course, as you teased earlier, we'll talk about again later, having guys who are supposed to hit, namely Austin Riley, hitting again is probably part of that too. Because, for all of Marcell Ozuna's brilliance, and he has been brilliant all year long, no one can carry an offense by themselves, not even arguably the best hitter in baseball so far this season, or at least the best hitter in the National League so far this season in Ozuna. And it's got to be a collective effort. And we kind of saw that more and more in the last 3 or 4 games.
Well, and the at bats look better. I mean, that was really my takeaway. Obviously, the results are one thing, but man, I mean, you watch those national series and you sit there watching. It's like, did these guys do any pregame prep? Did they predetermine that they were going to swing at pitches 1, 2, and 4 in the at bat and just let it rip? It felt like there was more of an approach. They were more patient. They were in more favorable counts, deeper counts. Overall, it was just really encouraging, and it was a warm weekend in Atlanta. I'm sure the weather warming up is only going to help this team because, as we know and as we've talked about on this show for quite some time now, despite the lack of results for all of May and the early parts of June, the Braves have continued to hit the ball hard. The exit velocity is good. The hard hit rate is good. The barrel rate is good. It just was a lack of results, and maybe as it warms up, if that's going to translate into more home runs. Off the top of my head, the Braves had 7 home runs this weekend, I think. I mean, that is a huge sign that the Braves are back to doing what they did last season when they just bludgeoned team with seemingly 2 or 3 home runs every single night.
Yeah, speaking of that, I promised listeners that are new or returning that we're going to dive into these 3 games a little bit more. But a not so fun stat at the top. Last year, the Braves only had 18 games all season long without a home run, which is an absurd number. We've talked about how good they were last year endlessly, but that is an absurd number. This year, they already have more. They have 25 games without a home run already this year after 18 all year last year. So that kind of tells you, and look, we won't kind of gloss over this because it's been talked about, but Alex Anthopoulos did a pretty lengthy, and I would say out of character interview for him. He doesn't usually call those kind of interviews mid-season, but it was like 20 minutes or so, and he kind of just was pretty open. Like, they built this team for power. We all kind of know that. We've all talked around it. This is a team built on power, and when the power is happening, as it usually is, they tend to score a lot of runs. And to your point, they tended to blast the ball this weekend. And hey, would you look at that? The results were much better when you actually hit the ball a long way.
Yeah, and I thought a couple of days ago, I had the chance to interview Justin Toscano of the AJC. And if you missed that show, please, I would encourage you to go back and listen. Justin had some really great insight into what he has seen inside the clubhouse while covering the team. And Justin's real takeaway was, for the first time in a while, he felt like there was some real confusion and maybe angst in the clubhouse, especially after the rough series in Washington, where they had lost 3 of 4 and had lost 6 out of 8 to the Nationals. So it's good to see the Braves just kind of settle back in. And you mentioned Anthopoulos talking to the media. I was a little surprised that he did it. Good on Alex for being candid with the state of the roster. And, as Alex said, and I think it's, of course, down the road a little ways, it's going to be very interesting to see what he does come trade deadline time, because there are quite a few things that this roster could use. It's just going to be a matter of what kind of market there is and what he feels are ultimately going to give this team the best chance in September and hopefully deep into October.
Yeah, we are aligned there, and I would echo that. I had nothing to do with that interview that you did with Justin, but I would strongly encourage everybody to listen to that because Justin's very smart, and that was a fun listen, as well as our entire archive. Because I know, by the way, Stephen and especially Sean were very busy on the feed this week. We did an extra podcast because Sean is a hero and broke in some extra stuff on Friday night and Saturday. So a busy week. Please subscribe to the show, and we'll have much more to come, including on this podcast. And I promise, as I said a second ago, we'll dive into the weekend's games in a minute. But first, a word from our partners at SeatGeek. Today's show is sponsored by the folks at SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the official ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, so they have you covered for all of your baseball ticketing needs. They have over 28 million downloads, and SeatGeek is the #1 rated ticketing app. There are more than 70,000 events at SeatGeek, including concerts, sports, festivals, theater events, and much more. Baseball season is, of course, in full swing, and you do not want to miss out on any of the action. They have your tickets to SeatGeek to every single game, and of course, that includes Braves stuff, whether they're at home in Atlanta or on the road in other ballparks. I know I've used SeatGeek for a long time for Braves tickets and Falcons tickets and many more things in the past. They have you covered across the board. Plus, they put all the tickets across the web in one place to make sure that you are getting the best possible deal at SeatGeek. Each ticket is rated on a scale of 1 to 10. Keep an eye out for the green dots as well as the best values to kind of steer you in the right direction at SeatGeek. And every ticket is backed by their buyer guarantee, and SeatGeek is the only site that lets you return your tickets ahead of the event with swaps. And you know that we are coming through for you guys. You can use our code HAMMER for $20 off tickets at SeatGeek. That is $20 off your first purchase with promo code HAMMER when you use SeatGeek. Make sure you click on the link in our podcast description to download the SeatGeek app today. One more time, that is promo code HAMMER, $20 off your first purchase with the folks at SeatGeek. Okay, Scott, let us dive into some game action from the weekend. We all know the deal now. It was, Friday and Saturday were wins. Sunday was a loss, but Friday was, again, a continuation of a second straight game of positivity on offense. 7 runs, 12 hits. I will say it was grouped together. They scored all 7 runs in the first 2 innings on Friday, but it was enough. You mentioned Austin Riley heating up. He had a home run for the first time in a long time on Friday. Matt Olson's been pretty good lately. And of course, they handed it over to Chris Sale, who has been Chris Sale. And man, I feel like we do this every week, but Chris Sale's been absurd too. So Friday was kind of a breezy win, and so was Saturday in a lot of ways. But again, kind of more of that power emphasis because they had home runs, doubles, etc.
Well, and it was especially nice because we could probably count on one hand the number of breezy wins the Braves have had since the calendar turned to May. I mean, even the wins have seemingly been like these slugfests where they're just trying to hang on to win. Even Thursday's game in Baltimore was like that. You took the words out of my mouth with Chris Sale. What more can we say? 7 innings for the 5th time in 6 starts. Sale has gone 7 innings, which is so impressive. And admittedly, he wasn't even like his A1 self on Friday. And the final line is 7 innings, 5 hits, 3 of which came in the first inning, 2 runs, 7 strikeouts, and 2 walks. I mean, this guy, he is just so locked in. And we mentioned the big offensive performances from Ozuna, who, Marcell Ozuna, we got to start talking about like a legitimate Triple Crown possibility here. Marcell Ozuna homers, Austin Riley homers, first time since May 3rd. And as we kind of talked about on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, Matt Olson has kind of quietly been very good for maybe a month now. Feels like he is back. We know how good Ozuna has been. And if Austin Riley, if this is the start of Austin's crazy summer runs that he seemingly always does, that big 3 is going to be able to carry the Braves, especially if a couple more guys in the bottom half of the lineup can step up.
Yeah, I sort of alluded to this, and I'll keep it short, I promise. But for whatever reason, I'll just be broad and say the reply guys can't seem to understand that Matt Olson's been pretty good this year. Like every time I see a tweet, or not every time, but a lot of the times, it's like, the offense is struggling. Look at Matt Olson. He's doing this. I'm like, Matt Olson's been very clearly their second best hitter this year. There's a big gap there. Admittedly, Ozuna has been out of his mind, but Matt Olson had like maybe a 3-week stretch where he was bad, and the rest of the year has been awesome. Pretty much, he has a 128 WRC plus, and yeah, that's not where he was last year when he was not going to probably repeat that considering how good he was. But if you just told me he had a 128 WRC plus, it's like, yeah, that's kind of a B minus for him, but that's a very good hitter. No problem.
Well, and give it a couple of weeks, and I think Matt will be in the 140s. His at-bats look really good right now. Even over the last week, I can think of a couple times where he just missed a pitch that could have gone very far. So, yeah, my concern level with Matt is 0 at this point.
Agreed. Looking ahead, I guess a little bit to Saturday, of course, their 3rd straight win, the first time they'd won 3 in a row in a very long time. That was the first game post Michael Harris. We'll talk about him and the injury a little bit more later in the podcast, but sort of the pivot of that was, what's the outfield going to look like, but also who's going to hit leadoff because Harris had been leading off against right-handers since Ronald went down. And they went to Jarred Kelenic, who we teased a little bit earlier, but he had probably the biggest single swing of the day on Saturday with a 2-run homer that kind of took the lead and never relinquished it. What did you make of that aspect? We're going to get into the outfield later on, but do you like or are you okay with hitting Kelenic leadoff? Because, look, we all kind of understand this, but there really is not an ideal option in the absence of Ronald.
Yeah, it made sense to me because, as you just outlined, who else is going to do it? Don't have Michael Harris. You don't have Ronald Acuna Jr. Ozzie Albies is not a leadoff hitter. Maybe
not against righties. He's not for sure.
Yes, correct. Against lefties, yes. Let Ozzie have the first crack at the left-handed pitcher because we know what he does to them. But we're going to talk about Adam Duvall, but obviously Duvall is not a candidate to lead off. You're not going to have the catchers do it. You're not going to put one of the big boppers up there. So Kelenic is very much the only option that I see to lead off against righties, which is going to be most of the time. And if you've been listening to the show, we've talked about it. I think it's been a little flown under the radar a little bit, but Kelenic has been quite good for maybe the past month now. He's done a lot of things. The power is starting to show up. His strikeouts have gone down a little bit. He's still not walking a ton, but I feel like his at bats are better and he's working into the count more. And I mean, right now it seems like he's kind of given the team a little bit of a spark. Again, we could probably say after everything on this show that it was only 3 or 4 games that we're talking about. But it feels like to me that Kelenic is going to be the leadoff guy just about every night moving forward against right-handed pitching. And even against lefties, I'm curious to see what Kelenic is going to be able to do, especially if he's down in the 7th or 8th spot. I like the idea of having him out there basically every day because, as we talked about really throughout the winter and coming into the season, it would behoove the Braves to see what exactly Kelenic is over close to 162 because he is a player who could be in their long-term plans.
Yeah, and we talked about it a lot over the winter about like, right now it's kind of found money with Kelnick. You're hoping he's just going to be a league average bat or whatever, but there's always upside there. Top prospect, top draft pick, super talented. Maybe it comes together. But yeah, as long as he's hitting, I have no issue with it whatsoever. There are more drastic options. Like I think some of the more sabermetrically inclined folks that I tend to think are pretty smart have floated like Austin hitting leadoff, which I actually wouldn't mind. But I think Braves fans would probably freak out on the whole if they saw Riley hitting leadoff. I would like it, to be honest with you, but that's a more extreme. And by the way, Snit won't do that, just so it doesn't actually matter. So yeah, we'll leave it there. But I think Kelnick is a worthy option in the midst of not having a ton of great options to lead off. And by the way, lineup construction, we used to do a lot more on the show. I just don't care that much. Most of the time, it's kind of harmless. Every once in a while, when I see Arcia hitting sixth, I get mad. But other than that, I'm okay.
Yeah, or Adam Duvall should not be batting high up against a right-handed pitcher. But as we kind of talked about, like somebody has to hit somewhere, and
Yep,
at some point you just have to hit the damn baseball. It's right,
it's
like
true.
that's the cure-all for everything is hit the ball, score runs. But yeah, I do like the Kelnic at the leadoff spot. Ozzie has been okay this season. Feels like he's going to be locked into that number 2 spot in the order. You have to have Marcel at number 3. I know that was a 1-game experiment in Baltimore where
Oh,
Marcel was dropped to 5th, and everyone was like, wait a minute, this dude is legitimately the best hitter in the National League right now. Let's not reduce his at bats and prevent him from going in the first inning every night. And we don't have to go through that whole rabbit hole. But with Matt and then Riley, and you just keep going down the list. Hopefully, Sean Murphy settles in, and we're going to talk about Ramon Laureano and a couple of the outfield options. It feels to me like things are slowly coming together if they can just avoid the damn injury bug. And but that's been easier said than done, really, since day one of this season.
yes, certainly that is the case. And even if the lineup's not what it was supposed to be, because you take out Ronald and even Michael Harris, it starts to get worse. But still plenty of firepower if everybody is still rocking and rolling and healthy. I am obligated, of course, Scott, to at least mention the 2 words Charlie Morton. He pitched quite well again on Saturday. 6 innings, 1 run, 3 hits, struck out 8. Still has an ERA in the threes. Everyone that listens to the podcast regularly will know how I feel about Charlie. If you don't listen to the podcast regularly, first of all, thank you for listening. Second of all, I am known as a Charlie Morton advocate of sorts. And no, I don't believe he's an ace at this point in time because he's not. But Charlie Morton, you look up in the middle of June, ERA in the threes, striking guys out and doing what Charlie Morton does.
Brad, do you know what the best part of Charlie Morton's starts are?
I'm sure it has something to do with the game that you made up this weekend.
It is America's favorite game. America's favorite game. Which inning is Charlie Morton? And I love Charlie Morton. But what inning is Charlie Morton going to hit a left-handed batter in the foot with a curveball? It's a great game. I encourage everyone to play it. Please tweet me whenever he's on the mound. You can pick any inning. It could be the first, could be the second. It was the 3rd inning on Saturday when Chuck hit Chuck hit a batter in the foot. That was my prediction. I was very proud of myself. A few others also had the 3rd inning. So I think this has potential to go nationwide, Brad. America's favorite game. What inning does Charlie Morton hit a batter with a curveball? I don't know. Maybe it's just a game that I'll play by myself. But anyway, yes,
Someone
Charlie
will play with
Morton.
you. I saw some enthusiastic responses to your tweet, so somebody's going to be along with you, I think.
Let's get it going. We could turn it into a segment on the podcast. We could get some awards or like little giveaways if you get the inning. Or I don't know. We'll workshop this for another day.
Scott's creating more work for me, is what he's trying to do right now on the podcast, which I definitely appreciate. No, I'm kidding, of course. tongue in cheek, but it is worth noting that the pitching still has been for most days, 4 out of 5 days anyway, has been quite solid, and that includes Charlie, who for my money is the best four starter in baseball right now, and I will stand on that both with the numbers and the eye test. Okay, Scott, let's talk about Sunday, but it's gonna be a lot of talking about Sunday. Honestly, there's a lot of things that happened in the game today. So before we get to that, a word from our friends at Foul Territory on AG1.
Eric Kratz here from FT. I'm a former athlete that really pays attention to his routine. And AG1 every morning before my workouts is something that gets my day going.
Hey, Braun here. AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that delivers daily nutrients and gut health support, and it's backed by multiple research studies so you can trust what you're putting in your body.
Unlike other products which only test their ingredients in isolation, AG1 tests their formula as a whole.
Ready for this stat? 97% of people in a research study felt more energy after 30 days of drinking AG1. If I had to recommend one product to support whole body health, it's AG1, and that's why FT is excited to have them as a new partner. Starting your journey with AG1 is a win. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase at drinkag1.com/foul. That's drinkag1.com/FOUL. Go check it out, FT fam.
Okay, Scott, let us dive into Sunday's game. It was a roller coaster. The curse is alive as far as Sunday losses are concerned. They're down 6-2 after 4 innings. They come all the way back. 2 runs in the sixth on 4 consecutive 2-out hits. Austin Riley, who we mentioned a few times, but we should always say, you mentioned the at-bat. I definitely agree with you. A fantastic plate appearance. Fouled off 6 pitches. He seemingly has found it in a way that you would think he would as an established star player. By the way, he doubled his home run total for the season this weekend. He hit 3 home runs this weekend after hitting 3 to this point in the season. Now, the first number is much more concerning than the second number, but I think that Austin is alive. And I'll just give you the numbers now while I have it in front of me. His first 53 games of the season, so until basically Friday, he had a 618 OPS, and that included a 406, yikes, OPS. Since he returned from the injury, those numbers are now looking like they're hopefully quite long in the past. And yes, they lost the game, but I just want to say this out loud that, Riley looks like Riley again.
He does. And really, I thought the most encouraging part was despite going down 6-2 pretty early, the Braves fought back.
Yep.
They had big hits from a handful of players in the lineup. And that was such a trademark of this team the last couple of years, where even if they were down early, it never felt like they were out of a game. And candidly, that has not been the case for a lot of this season. I mean, how many games during the downturn did the Braves go down 5-0 early? And it was like, well, that's game. It was good to see them fight back from down 4, of course, an unfortunate 9th inning with Raisel Iglesias, who we're going to talk about here in a little bit, and a pretty discouraging start, I thought, from Hurston Waldrep. But again, kind of the overall theme of this podcast was the offense looks so much more back to normal. And if that's going to be the big takeaway from the series and moving forward, even though they only won 2 games this weekend, which is funny to say, but only won 2 out of 3, you will absolutely take it if it means that better days are on the horizon.
Yes, we agree on that. And there's a reason why we're trying to emphasize that. It is the theme of the podcast. With that said, there was not a lot of encouragement with the pitching on Sunday, which we have to always talk about on this Sunday evening podcast. So you mentioned Waldrep. He's looked okay the first time through the order in both starts. And then after that, the wheels have come off both times, his command, etc. The Braves have already announced that he's going to go back to Gwinnett. So that's not a huge surprise after he struggled today, but that is already happening as we're recording this podcast. Look, he's still a young guy, and we tried to kind of warn people. I know when I talked to Garrett Spain, a prospect expert that we trust immensely on this podcast a couple weeks ago, he kind of warned about this, then we did, and I know Sean Steven did, that Waldrep is not considered to be anything close to a finished product. He is the high upside guy. He is really talented. His splitter is incredible, all that stuff. But I think the people that I trust in evaluating minor league options were not super convinced that he was going to be pretty good when he arrived, because he's not quite there yet. And look, that looks to be the case at this point in time. I don't know if this is going to close the door on him for the year by any means, but I think that at the very least, we've kind of seen why the concerns were there between the fastball not being fantastic at this point in time and really kind of being a 2-pitch guy for the most part. I don't know what else you want to add to that, but it was frustrating. I don't think, though, this is just me, maybe you feel differently. I'm not saying that this is like curtains for him by any means, but he did not look great this week.
Well, like 99.8% of college pitchers, there is a reason that even if you are a top draft pick, they always get 1 or 2 years in the minors, full seasons in the minor leagues before they are even close to being ready. Of course, the Braves were very aggressive with pushing Waldrep up. But you have to remember, this dude was pitching in the College World Series 1 year ago. If you ever need to remind yourself that, I know today the hot takes were unbelievable. This kid's terrible. This kid is a bust. This kid is a reliever, blah, blah, blah. Right. I get it. People were frustrated. People wanted to sweep. But at the end of the day, Waldrep is 22 years old. He has a plus plus splitter. He has an upper 90s fastball, and he has a work in progress breaking ball, a pretty tight slider that he throws. It is going to take some time. Not every 22-year-old is going to come up and be Spencer Strider right away, right out of the gate. I think this is almost going to be, if you're looking for a silver lining, I think this could be a good thing for Hurston, that probably for the first time in his baseball life, he got his ass kicked a little bit, right? Like a bad start in DC. It started out pretty well, but it went very south very quickly and then got hammered the second time through the lineup today. For the first time in his baseball life, I think he's kind of taken one on the chin, and now he knows that he has stuff to work on, has to work on the command, has to work on the fastball, has to work on developing his third pitches to keep hitters honest. I do agree that for this season, I probably don't see Waldrep making much of an impact. Maybe they could bring him back in a bullpen role or in a fifth starter spot in August or September once he's had more time in Gwinnett. But long term, even though these first two starts were not great, I mean, it would be kind of silly to make any long-term decisions on Waldrep based on two starts less than a year after he was drafted.
Right. And I lost a bet to you on this podcast about when he would be called up. And I was a little surprised that they went as fast as they did with him. I kind of thought there was a chance that he might be up late in the year as a reliever. And this is more in a pre-Strider injury world. But right now, Waldrop's arsenal is more of a reliever arsenal. Like he's working on the third pitch, but yes, he throws hard. And again, the splitter is disgusting and it looks great even in the majors, but he doesn't really have the arsenal right now. I'm already kind of dreading this next segment because I already know what the response will be from a lot of different people, but there's a world in which he's just not as good as guys like Alan Winans and Bryce Elder, who are not as talented as Hurston Waldrep is. But as far as getting major league hitters out right now, especially in the third, fourth, fifth innings, it's a difference. Yes. Yeah, right now today on June 16th. Again, if you give me career, I will definitely take Waldrep over those guys. But as far, there's always a gap there between prospect readiness and also look, I'll raise my hand here. I'm sure you would admit this as well. Braves fans have been pretty spoiled with how well all of their big famous prospects have done recently. How many guys that are their top guys have come up and not play well right away? Like very few. And that's part of this too. People are kind of spoiled, and that's okay.
Yeah, definitely a learning opportunity for Hurston. I've said this a few times. I'll say it again. Nothing in my mind has changed long term. He has to figure out a way to work the fastball better. He had no swing and miss on the fastball today. I believe he threw it 25 times and did not get a single whiff on that pitch. The splitter is great, but if big league hitters are only looking for one pitch, guess what? It can be the greatest pitch on planet Earth. It is not going to get them out consistently. And we mentioned the slider is very much a work in progress. 22 years old, going to go back to Gwinnett. I hope the Braves leave him in Gwinnett for at least the next 2 months so he has a chance to go back and kind of pick up on what he learned and pitch every 5 days with the Stripers. And who knows, maybe in September or even October, he'll play a role of some kind. Of course, the Braves need Hurston Waldrep to be good. With the uncertainty in the rotation moving forward, they have every reason to develop him in the minor leagues. It was not a good first glimpse by any means, but Waldrop's ceiling is still high, and you just have to hope that he continues to get better.
Yes, and we'll leave that there for now. Now, the fallout is interesting too, because we're recording this again Sunday evening. We don't know yet what's going to happen on Monday. Snitker did tell the media today the plan is to bring a bullpen arm in for Monday. That does not mean explicitly that the Braves are going away from the six-man rotation. Now, they could go away from it, but it would make logical sense for them to use a reliever just because they can right now for a couple days. And also, there's a wrinkle here. I don't know if this is going to happen, but AJ Minter is eligible to return. His 15 days are up. He was throwing long toss at the stadium today, according to our guy Chris Willis at Battery Power. I don't know if he's ready, but keep an eye on that. And even if it's not AJ, they can go to a reliever if they want to, and then they can decide, or maybe they already have decided, whether to go back to 5-man rotation, or they have 5 days now, basically 6 days now, to choose another starter. Whether I think it would probably be either Elder or Winans based on their performances recently in Gwinnett. But that's an interesting decision that they have to make, especially if AJ is ready. I think obviously he'll come back because he's one of their best relievers. But if he's not ready, we'll see.
Yeah, we will see on the short term, and I mean, I guess the long term too. I think Justin Toscano had some interesting insight that clearly the Braves value pushing their starters back and utilizing the 6-man rotation whenever they can. It's my guess that Bryce Elder will be back up to make a start at some point this upcoming week. You mentioned he's been very good in Gwinnett. In the month of June, I believe he's made 4 starts with a 0.82 ERA. And maybe this is the most surprising and encouraging thing: 22 innings, 29 strikeouts, and 4 walks for Bryce Elder.
And what do we always say, Scott, about Bryce Elder?
Don't walk people.
What can he not do? Walk people. Because Bryce Elder, the strikeout numbers are, I would take that with a grain of salt. It is AAA. You have to adjust a little bit, but he has been, and look, I know I am lower on Bryce Elder than a lot of people were, even when he was pitching well. But something we have always said for new listeners, dating back a year plus, is that Bryce Elder cannot be a major league starter if he walks guys. He does not have the stuff for that. So if he stops walking people, I can buy him as a fifth starter. I don't think he's much beyond that, but again, there's a world where he's okay. Alan Winans too. Like, I saw some eye-dropping numbers. I think our guy Garrett Spain again wrote on Twitter that this is crazy. Alan Winans generated 18 swings and misses on his changeup in 1 start.
Ooh.
Now that's AAA, but still, that's kind of absurd. And he has 17 strikeouts in his last 2 starts with 2 walks. So, like, again, no one's going to get terribly excited about Alan Winans or Bryce Elder, including me. But we'll do our little mini spiel now about fifth starters and how everybody doesn't have a great fifth starter. That's still the case. And the Braves are just plugging holes. And look, Schwellenbach is still, by the way, in the rotation. Just to say that out loud, we'll get to that probably at the end of the podcast. But Schwellenbach is the currently probable starter for Tuesday. So that's really their fifth starter at the moment. And their sixth starter is this spot if they kind of do this. So it's up in the air. No one should be surprised if it's Elder or Winans, I would say. If it's not one of those 2 guys, I'll be surprised. And we will see if they even use that starter spot.
And the Braves do have a day off this week on Thursday. So maybe that'll impact how they handle the rotation. It is very much, it feels like day by day for the rotation, especially given the age and the workload stuff. But who knows? At some point, Bryce Elder is going to find himself back in Atlanta. It might be this week. It might be in a couple of weeks. It might be next month. But again, it is so obvious the Braves are trying to limit innings when they can for their starters, which is something that I think everybody should be in favor of. Because if there's one thing the Braves have not had the last 2 postseasons, the rotation has not been healthy in back-to-back years. And I know injuries are impossible to prepare for and all of that. But, I mean, the Braves have to do what they can to have Ronaldo Lopez, Chris Sale, and Max Fried healthy come October, whatever they can do. And if that means that Bryce Elder goes out there and just pitches okay a couple of times in an effort to get those guys an extra day or 2 of rest, then so be it. Maybe it's not the sexiest start that you're ever going to see, but we've also seen that Elder has been successful at times in the majors.
Yep, absolutely. And by the way, this might be a throwback long episode of the podcast as I sort of check the timestamp on the show. Anyway, speeding it up a little bit here, Scott. The Braves did option Ray Kerr to the minors on Sunday and called up, I think, is a player that's already a fan favorite after one day, Grant Holmes, a 28-year-old right-hander who threw 3 scoreless innings in his Major League debut. Yes, Major League debut for a 28-year-old. He was a first-round pick 10 years ago. And for anybody that didn't see this, Grant Holmes has a phenomenal head of hair, I got to say.
Yeah, that is a beautiful flow of lettuce. He looks like Kenny Powers from Eastbound and Down.
He sure does.
Even throws like him a little bit. Really, I mean, dude, I'm such a sucker for guys who stick it out in the minor leagues for a decade and ride those bus those bus trips across the country and stay in the rinky-dink hotels and make not a lot of money just to get that one chance at the major leagues. So for Holmes to get it today, 3 scoreless innings in front of his family, really cool. And hey, he's got a live fastball. Tampa's hitters could not do anything against it. It feels like he's going to get a real chance to stick. Holmes was actually starting a bit for Gwinnett, so he has the ability to go multiple innings, which is not something this bullpen really has right now. Potentially could even be like an opener at some point if the Braves wanted to do that with the bullpen. So very, very happy for him. I am sure he is elated to finally get his chance. Good for him. And let's hope that Grant sticks and has a nice year because he deserves it. Again, man, a decade in the minor leagues. That has to be a lot of just kind of laying in bed late at night and just kind of thinking about your life because a lot of players bail far before you hit your 10 years in the minors and good for him. It really was an impressive debut.
For sure. And the minor league guys that we trust, we're talking about him today. And like he's looked good in Gwinnett. Like it's not just and it's obviously it is a great story, but I think he might be major league talent. He was a first round pick a long time ago. We will see how this goes. And unfortunately, you could say he threw 3 innings today. That kind of makes him maybe a candidate to not be around that long because he can't pitch probably tomorrow, et cetera. That's kind of tough. But yeah, to your point about going multiple innings, that is a valuable skill set, especially if things get off the rails at times or you get a short start, et cetera. And really just a great story and something that should have been, I mean, it would have been nice to get a win today, but he did his part for sure. Like he kept it right there. Like the Braves had a chance to win this game today because he kept it at 6-2, like for as long as he did. 3 innings in a big spot there was a lot of fun and a fantastic story to be sure. Briefly, do you want to just discuss Raisel Iglesias? Because I think people are pretty angsty about him right now. It was a home run that he allowed that kind of lost them the game today. If you watch the game or even watch the StatCast, it was a really good pitch. It was nowhere near the zone. It was below the zone. Like hard for me to get pretty mad about that. And he's still been pretty good this season, both the season and also recently. I think he had like a 1 ERA in his past 9 or 10 games before today. Still a sub-3 ERA for the season. Did you see any of that today? Like people were kind of mad about that. I mean, I guess it's just normal closer stuff, but I saw that he's not a closer. It's like, well, actually, he has been a closer for a very long time and a very, very good one.
Yeah, he has. The lack of strikeouts, it's funny. Before today's game, when we kind of laid out the podcast outline, we were going to talk about Raisel and the fact that he has not struck anybody out this season.
Way down.
His strikeouts were way down compared to his career norms, which has been a very good career. And of course, even though he gave up the homer on Sunday, he struck out 3 hitters.
He sure did.
So it's like Raisel sees our Google Doc with all of our notes. I am not necessarily concerned. I do want to see the strikeouts come back up. Anytime you can strike guys out in the 9th inning, it is only going to help things. To remove the flukiness of a couple of soft singles or giving up a home run on even a good pitch, you give up a home run. I'm not really concerned about Raisel. I honestly hadn't even noticed the strikeouts were down so much. And sure, I mean, is he prime Mariano Rivera or prime Craig Kimbrell? No, but he's been fine enough for me. And anytime a closer gives one up, especially with all of the emotional highs of Riley's home run, and then like 5 minutes later, he gives up the homer, and it was just kind of a womp womp. But I think for Raisel, he's a veteran. The velocity is still fine. I'm not really concerned. We'll just have to keep an eye on him, and hopefully those strikeouts tick back up because that's such a weapon for closers.
I'm a fan of talking about sample size as the thing that matters, and with relievers, it's even more pronounced. The samples are just tiny on even like full season samples for relievers are very small. But yeah, I'm attributing this mostly to Noy. I did a little bit of a deep dive. Like you said, we were already preparing for this. His whiff rate's down, which is kind of what you would look at as to why he's not getting strikeouts. But he has currently a 99th percentile barrel rate allowed. So like no one's hitting the ball hard on him. He's like you mentioned, his velocity is almost exactly the same as it was last year. I'm not concerned. Just wanted to at least flag it because you don't like to your point, you have to strike guys out eventually, but I'm not concerned. All right, last thing before we get out of here. A quick Michael Harris check-in. Obviously, we talked about it on the feed, so if you want more of the reaction from Steven and Sean, etc., that is available for you. But we now know, at least as of today, it's a grade 2 hamstring strain for Michael Harris. There is no official timetable. The Braves don't often give timetables, but if you look around, as I did today, I don't know if you did, I did some Googling. it would be a shock to me, and I think everyone, if it was less than a month for Michael Harris. It might be 2 months. It might be longer. We don't really know. It's all a guess. But grade 2 is not what you wanted to see for sure. Process wise, they were able to get Laureano on the roster because Strider was not on the 60 day yet. That happened today. But not even, I mean, I'm curious as to your reaction of the grade 2, but even beyond that, we got to talk about the state of the outfield because Captain Obvious here, Scott. The outfield situation is not what anybody wanted it to be, and right now it is like looking like 2021 pre-trades. Like it's pretty dark out there in the outfield.
Yes, it is. And man, you look at the outfield right now, and if you would have told me the outfield was going to be this in mid-June coming into the season, I mean, it would be hard to even get to this point, right? Like to connect the dots. It's like, well, wait, where are the outfielders who are like superstars? Where's the MVP? Where's the Gold Glove winner? For Harris, it sounds like 1 to 2 months is going to be the timeline. He, of course, is a young guy. He's athletic, so let's hope it's on the shorter end of that. But at the very least, the Braves have to find 3 outfielders to play every single night until Michael comes back. And man, I mean, Kelenic is playing better, which is encouraging. Adam Duvall has a negative 40 WRC plus against right-handed pitching this season.
Okay, Scott, I have to cut you off. Now, I was waiting for this. I did not prep you for this. We should at least say out loud, and the number is hilariously bad. Adam Duvall is actually not a historic platoon split guy. Adam Duvall actually has been pretty good against righties in his career. Like he's not, I think people think of him as a slugger, and sluggers often have big platoon splits. He usually doesn't, but man, sample size maybe? I don't even know. I'm not trying to wave it away, but man, it's really, really, really bad against righties, and you have to hope that it's, and honestly, Duvall's kind of always been this super streaky guy, so maybe it's just noise or mostly noise. But I laughed when I saw your note about his WRC plus against righties. It's in the negatives and not just by a little.
Yeah, I mean below 100 batting average. His OPS is below 200. Again, an OPS below 200 against righties. He is mashing lefties, which is encouraging. Of course, batting from the right side. I mean, there's some value in that. But clearly at age 35, I mean, Adam Duvall has some limitations. We talked about Kelenic. Ramon Laureano is interesting. Once upon a time, he was really good with the Oakland A's, but he got popped for PEDs and was suspended and hasn't been quite as good since. He was cut by the Cleveland Guardians a couple of weeks ago. Brian Anderson is around. He similarly, once upon a time, was quite good with the Marlins, but has not been that player for a few years. JP Martinez is like the epitome of like a fifth outfielder. You also have Forrest Wall and Gwinnett, who is in his mid-20s. I mean, maybe he could bring a little bit of spark with his on-base and his speed.
He can't hit, man.
Yeah,
I'm
he's
sorry,
never
Forrest.
hit. 26 years old in the minors. Not impossible. But if you hit your mid-20s in the minor leagues, the reality as a hitter is you're probably not going to make a great impact. So we're going to see. They're very much going to have to piece it together. And I mean, it feels inevitable now, even if it was leaning this way before Harris's injury. Alex Anthopoulos has to go get an impact outfielder at the deadline. Maybe not a superstar. That player may not even be available, but he has to get somebody, preferably who could platoon with Duvall or even spell Kelenic. Because, I mean, again, Acuna is done for the year. Let's say that Harris comes back in 6 weeks. I mean, what if there's another injury, Brad? I mean, then we're getting into scary hours.
Well, that's where we have to get to here because, there's nothing to say that you couldn't get an injury now while Harris is already out. And it is pretty dire. Again, Harris will be back eventually. Like it might be a while, but it isn't season ending. Like you're going to get Michael Harris back and he's going to be your center fielder when he comes back. But, just the sheer, you gave the names, just to say it out loud. The 5 guys on the roster right now, on the active roster, Kelenic, Duvall, Laureano, Brian Anderson, and JP Martinez, that is not a outfielder on a contender. It's an outfielder on a contender. It's just not. So everyone knows that. Of course, the extremely obvious thing to say is that in 2021, it was maybe even worse than this because of injuries. And Alex went out in the span of a week and got a bunch of guys who were not huge gets, but starting caliber or at least platoon caliber outfielders. I talk about Soler and Jock and all that. It worked out beautifully. Eddie Rosario. Obviously, Alex batted 1 million on those transactions. You can't always bank on that. They don't have to get 3 guys like they did last time, but they do probably have to get somebody else, especially because look, we just mentioned how good Kelenic's been recently, and I think that realistically, Kelenic's been as good or better than I would have hoped to this point. If he levels off, or if Duvall just hits the wall where he's in his mid-30s, what if he's just not very good? Like, he's always been streaky. We love Adam Duvall on this podcast. Maybe he's just not the same guy anymore. And then you get into Laureano was good 5 years ago in Oakland. I don't know if you can bank on that. So, not trying to paint a too dire of a picture, but I do think that they're going to need somebody else. And they don't appear willing or eager at all to play Marcel in left field, or they already would do that. Like, we've reached the point where if Marcel was an outfield option, they would have been using him probably this weekend in the outfield. I have to guess.
I think that ship has definitely sailed. And as longtime listeners know, it's always a talking point when we get closer to the trade deadline. But again, man, there are no exceptions to the trade deadline anymore after July 31st. There used to be the waiver period where you could sneak players through and get some trades done in August. That's gone with. So your roster at 4 p.m. Eastern time on July 31st, or whatever day the deadline is this year, I believe it's the 31st, that is your roster through the playoffs. So not only do the Braves have to navigate the next couple of months without Harris, but if someone gets hurt on August 1st in the outfield, the Braves are screwed. I mean, then you're talking about Ramon Laureano starting a playoff game, or Forrest Wall starting a playoff game. I mean, that is not acceptable. And I think Alex Anthopoulos would be the first one to tell you this. It's going to be a very interesting next 6 weeks or so, A, navigating the outfield without Harris, and B, seeing what Alex does to add to this outfield that very much needs an influx of talent.
Yeah, we were very positive on the show, and we still are on the whole here. But given all the injuries, you lay them out here in our document just to give you the credit for that. But Strider, Acuna, Ozzie missed time, Riley missed time, Murphy missed time, Pierce Johnson missed time, Minter's still out, Harris is out. Like, it has been worse than you would expect it to be for any team. The Braves have had below average injury luck so far. Even if, factoring in Ronald alone is a big loss for anybody as the best player in baseball in a lot of ways. But some work to be done for Anthopoulos. He didn't shy away from that in his comments to the media this week. He's not going to come out and say, we're going to do this, this, and this, because he's not that kind of guy. But it will officially surprise me, and I know it will surprise you if they do not go get an outfielder of some acclaim between now and the deadline, which is 6 weeks away.
Yes, it is going to very much be Alex Anthopoulos' time to make some moves. And I think that's something that Alex has. He has earned the trust of the fan base. I don't want to sound like a fanboy, or I'm just constantly beating the drum for Alex Anthopoulos, but he has shown that through his 5 or 6 years now in Atlanta, he has generally hit on more things than he is not. Nobody's perfect. He's not going to be right on every single deal, but he's going to have to face the music here and maybe overpay at a trade. I know that's something he probably would never want to do, but he might have to push a few chips in to try to give this team a chance. And I think we do have the benefit of having 6 weeks before trade deadline hits, so you can really evaluate and see, what is Jarred Kelenic like a month from now? Does Adam Duvall start to hit right-handed pitching, or is he this automatic out? What is the shortstop situation like? Orlando Arcia has been terrible for the last month and a half. One of the worst position players in the game. You go on and on down the list, injuries, whatever it might be. So it's going to be a big next month and a half of evaluation for Alex in the front office, because clearly this team still has the potential to have a deep run in October. But with all of the injuries, it is becoming more and more apparent they are going to need a couple of impact level additions, if, in my eyes anyway, if they're going to be a serious World Series contender.
Yeah, just to back you up so people don't think that you were just making stuff out of whole cloth about Orlando Arcia. Actually, this is from our friend Stephen Tolbert, our co-host, who just tweeted this about 10 minutes ago. Arcia in the last 2 months or so, since April 19th, is literally dead last in all of baseball among qualified position players at the plate. He has a 36 WRC plus in the last 2 months. So you were not wrong about that, and you weren't exaggerating about that. Hopefully that will balance out in the near future. Okay, Scott, before we get out of here, a brief look ahead at what's to come. We'll kind of save the weekend preview because it's coming up for the big series against the Yankees. That's going to be a showdown. The Yankees are quite good this year. But before that, 3 at home against Detroit. Detroit is basically the epitome of a 500 team so far this year. They look like that in the projections, in the preseason over-unders, in the run differential. They are mid, but not in a bad way. They're just okay. And it's Fried, it's Schwellenbach, and it's Lopez as the probables so far for the Braves as of Sunday evening. I don't know about you. I'm looking forward to Wednesday's game. It's, of course, the old businessman special. So, Scott, it's a 9:20 a.m. start for you, but it's a fantastic pitching matchup on Wednesday.
It is Ronaldo Lopez, who I believe leads all of baseball in ERA, unless something changed.
That is correct. 1.69. Very nice.
Nice. And against Tarek Skubal for the Detroit Tigers, who might be the best pitcher in baseball that is not a household name. He's nasty. He's a lefty. That's about as good of a pitching matchup as you're going to get in the middle of Wednesday afternoon. So, as you said, the Tigers, not a bad team, not a good team. They can't really score. Like, the offense is pretty bad, but they found a way to be competitive in the American League Central, which has surprisingly been pretty good this year. They're very much a 500 team. Tigers were actually above 500 after last year's All-Star game, team that kind of had some young players start to figure things out. So they're not bad. They're not a pushover. This is not the Tigers of a couple of years ago where they lost like 107 games, but a chance for the Braves, especially at home, and especially the way the lineup has woken up, to hopefully take advantage. 2 out of 3 would be great. Of course, a sweep would be awesome. But clear your schedules for Wednesday afternoon, because that is going to be a terrific pitching matchup.
Or Wednesday morning in one particular co-host case on this podcast. I looked this up. The Tigers have a -3 run differential this season, which is essentially 0. So that's what they are at this point. Okay, Scott, let us get out of here. Anything to plug at the end of this, what I believe will be our longest episode of Hammer Territory yet?
Not a ton to plug. Good to do a show with you, Brad, where we were not like banging our heads against the wall because of the offense. It's been a frustrating couple of weeks, but some very encouraging signs this weekend for the Braves. Let's hope they continue it against the Tigers, and then a big series against the Yankees next weekend. That'll be a lot of fun. Try to avoid Aaron Judge and Juan Soto hitting 500-foot homers against us. But overall, hard to not be encouraged by the offense waking up this weekend, and let's hope it keeps rolling.
Strongly agree. And please, please, please subscribe to the Hammer Territory podcast anywhere you might find podcasts. That includes Apple, Spotify, Overcast. If you are able to leave 5-star ratings on your podcast player of choice, we definitely would encourage that and be thankful for it. And beyond just listening, which we definitely appreciate, it would be huge for us if you would tell your friends either on social media or in your everyday offline life about the podcast, because we're trying to grow the show. Check out the entire Foul Territory network as well. Not just us, but there's Northside Territory and Dodgers Territory, etc. If you are into baseball beyond the Braves' walls, and we appreciate all the support from Foul Territory. For Scott, thank you for listening to the podcast. We'll see you all next time.